Right, it's recording. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. My name is Emily Phippen, and I worked with Abigail Seitz, Brianna Collins, and Cody Douglas on our Psychology 492 thesis, which we titled Environmental Awareness and Intentionality. Our study was the whole premise we were looking at dispositional mindfulness and how it affected romantic and non-romantic relationships. And we chose to title our study Environmental Awareness and Intentionality so that the participants in our study were not revealed to the true nature of what we were looking into. So, as I just mentioned, we were looking at dispositional mindfulness and how mindfulness affects romantic and non-romantic relationships. The goals of our study were to examine if there was a difference in general mindfulness levels between individuals who were currently in a romantic relationship versus single individuals. And further, we were interested in examining if behaviors that were related to mindfulness, such as communication, emotion regulation, and conflict resolution, were correlated with higher levels of relationship satisfaction, either romantic or otherwise. Our study was interested in dispositional mindfulness levels between singles and couples, men and women, as well as the individual traits that I just listed and how those were associated with mindfulness levels. And finally, we were interested in the links between mindfulness and relationship satisfaction, as well as overall life satisfaction. So just to kind of operationalize some of the terms that we used in our study, first, mindfulness. We decided to use the APA dictionary for all of our terms. Mindfulness is defined as an awareness of one's internal states and surroundings. And I know that intentionality and environmental awareness are both synonyms for mindfulness. So we chose to kind of put those in the title of our study so that participants wouldn't be revealed to the true nature of our study. Next, platonic love is defined as a type of love in which there is no overt sexual behavior or desire. This is love between friends, this could be love between family members, things like that. We were also looking at explicit emotion regulation, which is defined as requiring conscious monitoring using techniques such as learning to construe situations differently in order to manage them better, changing the target of an emotion in a way likely to produce a more positive outcome, and recognizing how different behaviors can be used in a given emotional state. So this, we're looking at kind of emotion regulation and the intentional regulating of emotions and kind of managing those more negative emotions such as anger, hostility. Next, communication is defined as the transmission of information, which may be by verbal or nonverbal means, and the verbal means may be oral or written. That's also considered verbal. Nonverbal communication further is defined as the act of conveying information without the use of words. So basically through body language, facial expressions, tone, inflection, and other physical indications. And finally, we were interested in conflict resolution, which is defined as the reduction of discord and friction between individuals or groups, usually through the use of active strategies such as conciliation, negotiation, and bargaining. Conciliation is defined as the act or process of reconciling the positions of individuals or groups whose interests and goals are, at least initially, in opposition or incompatible. So conflict resolution is just really how you resolve issues within relationships. So looking at some previous research, first, Barnes and his colleagues were interested in how mindfulness affects overall relationship satisfaction and how relationship satisfaction and stress affect mindfulness and how mindfulness affects those traits as well. And what they found was that mindfulness tends to predict lower levels of emotional stress responses, as well as more positive conflict change within the relationship. So even pre-conflict as well as post-conflict, mindfulness has been determined to have an effect on more positive ways of dealing with conflict in relationships. Gamble and Keeling in 2010 were interested in how mindfulness on whether mindfulness being incorporated into couple or family therapy had an effect on relationship satisfaction. And what they found was that mindfulness being incorporated into these types of therapies tended to lead to higher levels of communication and emotion regulation, which ultimately increased romantic satisfaction overall. Carandish in 2019 was looking at if practicing mindfulness through a relationship enhancement program affected overall relationship satisfaction. So what he did was he took a group of couples, he had them kind of discuss some things prior to the study, and then he had the couples go through a relationship enhancement program that incorporated mindfulness, and then kind of looked at their levels of conflict after this program. And what he found was that practicing mindfulness through these relationship enhancement programs increased participants' emotion regulation and conflict resolution, and effectively allowed them to not only be able to resolve their conflicts, but better regulate their emotions during those conflicts as well. Mandel and his colleagues in 2017 were interested in meditation mindfulness and how that has an effect on overall well-being, life satisfaction, and emotion regulation. And what they found was that better emotion regulation tends to lead to higher states of mindfulness, mental mindfulness, which in turn leads to higher levels of subjective well-being. And this conclusion was really interesting to the researchers because the conventional model says that mindfulness leads to better emotion regulation, leads to better health overall. But what Mandel and his colleagues found was that better emotion regulation first led to a more mindful state of mind, a more mindful state of being, which in turn led to better health. So he found a different explanatory model to describe mindfulness and emotion regulation in that sense. Finally, Kim's and her colleagues in 2019 explored mindfulness on interpersonal levels as well as intrapersonal levels within romantic relationships. And what she and her colleagues found was that mindfulness, again, was associated with higher levels of subjective well-being, as well as relationship well-being or overall relationship satisfaction. So all of these examples of previous research that we found kind of supported our hypothesis that mindfulness would have an effect on relationship satisfaction. However, the existing research fails to focus on mindfulness in single individuals and single individuals' relationships, whether it be friendships or familial relationships, acquaintanceships, things like that. We were interested in seeing if these same trends that were found for romantic relationships could be found in the platonic relationships of single individuals. Again, previous research does not include looking at overall relationship satisfaction by comparing levels of satisfaction among singles and individuals in a relationship. The research does not include if practicing mindfulness may influence relationship status, if people who are in romantic relationships currently have higher levels of mindfulness, or if mindfulness doesn't really have an effect on relationship status. And finally, the research does not look or determine whether people who are single versus in a relationship differ in how they practice their levels of mindfulness. So the researchers came up with several different research questions and hypotheses. Our first research question that we came up with was, do single people differ from couples in their levels of mindfulness in relation to romantic and platonic relationships? So this question, we were really interested in if mindfulness levels had a correlation to single individuals' either previous romantic relationships or current platonic relationships, so current familial or friendship relationships, or any of their previous romantic relationships. And we wanted to compare those levels of mindfulness to couples to see kind of the trends and if the existing research if what was found in the existing research would generalize to single people as well. Our second research question was, how do single versus coupled people vary in their traits related to mindfulness? And does actively practicing these traits lead to higher levels of relationship satisfaction, both romantic and platonic? So the traits that we were explicitly interested in were conscientiousness, communication, emotion regulation. We were also interested in conflict resolution, and again, relationship satisfaction. And we'll get into the measures in a little bit, but we wanted to see if these various traits had an effect on relationship satisfaction and mindfulness as well. And our last research question was, do mindfulness and related behaviors have an effect on relationship status? Now, this was more of a tricky question, more of a tricky research question. We were interested in seeing if we could find out whether mindfulness levels maybe were a predictor of relationship status or relationship quality. Maybe if mindfulness and these related behaviors such as communication and emotion regulation had an effect on if they led to maybe higher levels of relationship satisfaction or a higher likelihood of being in a relationship in the future. We came up with two hypotheses. Our first hypothesis was that participants who score higher on measures of relationship satisfaction, either romantic or otherwise, platonic, familial, will also score higher on measures of mindfulness. And this is because past research supports this hypothesis. But further, we just believe, or we kind of hypothesized that individuals who tended to be more present in their relationships, more intentional in their relationships and their behaviors within those relationships led to higher levels of relationship satisfaction, likely due to increased communication and emotion regulation. Our second hypothesis that we came up with was that individuals who score higher on scales of emotion regulation, communication, and conscientiousness will report higher levels of relationship satisfaction and mindfulness overall. So we determined that these three traits, emotion regulation, communication, and conscientiousness, would be the most indicative of mindfulness and relationship satisfaction. So we predicted that individuals who score higher on these measures would also score higher on measures of mindfulness and relationship satisfaction. So for our methods, our survey was conducted on Qualtrics, and we sent out this survey, I believe in March or April, and overall we obtained 85 participants. Initially we obtained 127, but we were only able to use 85 of those responses because some of the participants either didn't complete the survey fully or took less than 10 minutes to complete the survey, and we felt that 10 minutes or under was too little of time to adequately answer all of the questions that were on the survey. So any responses that were under 10 minutes, took under 10 minutes, we decided to not consider for this study. Further, 65% or 65 of our participants were female, 18 were male, and 2 were of a third or non-binary gender, which we thought was kind of interesting. We were interested in seeing how non-binary individuals differed in their levels of mindfulness, but because we only got 2 of these individuals, we weren't able to get a very substantial sample. 51.8% of our participants were in a romantic relationship at the time of survey completion, while 48.2% were single. So we had a pretty even split of single versus paired individuals in our survey, which was exactly what we wanted. All of our participants were 18 years or older, and our participants were recruited through a variety of platforms. We used various Reddit subreddits, pages on Reddit. We used various Facebook groups as well. And we also contacted acquaintances of ours personally, family and friends that we knew that might want to take our survey. So our survey consisted of a number of scales. All of these, after the demographic section, which asked participants about their age, gender, relationship status, and details about their relationship if they were in one, they would complete these various scales. The first scale that was on our survey was the Mindful Attention Awareness Scale, which was a measure of trait mindfulness. This was the measure that we came across that was consistently used for measuring mindfulness in studies. So this was the measure that we chose for our study. Next was the Emotional Regulation Questionnaire, which was a measure of emotional regulation, how well individuals are able to regulate their emotions. The Burns Relationship Satisfaction Scale is a measure of relationship satisfaction, of course. Within the Burns, it doesn't explicitly say romantic relationship or platonic relationship. So we were able, but in this study, we used it for romantic satisfaction, and then we ended up using the interpersonal support evaluation list for individuals who were not currently in a romantic relationship. The Unfolding 5-Factor Model Conscientiousness Scale was a measure of conscientiousness, which again is kind of being conscientious, intentional. How aware of you are you of the present circumstances? The Interpersonal Support Evaluation List was a measure of interpersonal relations. So this was the measure that we used primarily for single individuals or individuals who had never been in a romantic relationship. And we wanted to kind of see their levels of interpersonal skills and satisfaction overall. Next is the conflict management scale. Sorry. The conflict management scale, again, a measure of conflict management. How well are you able to resolve issues within your relationship? And finally, we had the general trust scale, which was a measure of trust within the relationship. Trust is a very foundational skill that you need for a relationship. And so we wanted to see participants' levels of trust. So as I mentioned, of course, the participants completed the demographic section first. Participants who were currently in a romantic relationship completed the survey in the following order. It was the Mindful Attention Awareness Scale, the Emotional Regulation Questionnaire, the Burns Relationship Satisfaction Scale, the Unfolding 5-Factor Model Conscientiousness Scale, the Interpersonal Support Evaluation List, Conflict Management Scale, and General Trust Scale. Participants who were single and have never been in a romantic relationship completed all of the same scales in the same order, except with the exclusion of the Burns Relationship Satisfaction Scale. And we chose to do this because individuals who were single and had never been in a romantic relationship were not able to contribute to our discussion on mindfulness within romantic relationships because they had never been in one. And so we chose to instead measure these individuals' levels of interpersonal support. The survey took about 10 to 15 minutes on average. It didn't take anyone less than 10 minutes. And if it did, they likely didn't complete the whole scale. So I would say the average was about 15 minutes to complete the scale or the survey. What did we find? We ended up finding a lot of really statistically significant results. First, let me move my little icon here. First, we found a significant difference in participants who reported that they were currently in a romantic relationship or had previously been in a romantic relationship on the Burns Relationship Satisfaction Scale, which ended up having a T-score of 6.657 with a p-value of less than 0.05. And what we found here was that participants who reported that they were currently in a romantic relationship or had previously been in a romantic relationship averaged significantly higher on measures of relationship satisfaction compared to individuals who reported that they were not in a romantic relationship or had never been in a romantic relationship. The mean for individuals who are currently in a romantic relationship averaged to be 42.55 compared to 28.29 for individuals who had never been in a romantic relationship or were currently single. We also found significant data in individuals who reported that they were currently in a romantic relationship or had previously been in a romantic relationship on the Interpersonal Support Evaluation List with a T-score of 3.32, on the Burns Relationship Satisfaction Scale with a T-score of 6.67, and the Unfolding 5-Factor Model Conscientiousness Scale, which had a T-score of 2.62, compared to participants who reported that they were not currently in a romantic relationship or had never been in a romantic relationship. So what we found here was that individuals who had been in a romantic relationship before or were in one now tended to score higher on interpersonal support, relationship satisfaction, and conscientiousness. We ran independent samples t-tests and Pearson correlations to determine the significance of all this data. And what we ended up finding was that the t-scores for the Burns relationship satisfaction scale, the interpersonal support evaluation list, and the unfolding 5-factor model conscientiousness scale were all statistically significant. And if you look at the table for the t-tests, you can compare the means and the standard deviations for individuals currently in a romantic relationship versus not currently in a romantic relationship. And if you look at the Pearson correlation table at the bottom, you can see the means and standard deviations, as well as the correlations on the table. We've ended up finding a lot of significant correlations. All of the scales were positively correlated with the mindfulness scale, which was exactly what we hypothesized. But we also found some even more statistically significant information pertaining to the interpersonal support evaluation list and the Burns relationship satisfaction scale, as well as the unfolding 5-factor model conscientiousness scale and the mindful attention awareness scale. So those two correlations were particularly statistically significant with a p-value of less than 0.01. But as you can see on our table, a lot of the correlations ended up being statistically significant, which is exactly what we wanted. Oh, here we go. So our discussion. Overall, our hypotheses were generally supported. We ended up finding a significant positive correlation between the mindful attention awareness scale and the Burns relationship satisfaction scale overall. We also ended up finding a significant difference between singles and couples on scores of relationship satisfaction, conscientiousness, mindfulness, and interpersonal support. So what we ended up finding was that couples tended to score higher on levels of relationship satisfaction, mindfulness, conscientiousness, and interpersonal support compared to singles who had never been in a romantic relationship previously. So essentially, we found a correlation between relationship satisfaction, mindfulness, and some associated traits such as conscientiousness and interpersonal support. What are the implications of this? Well, higher levels of dispositional mindfulness tend to lead to higher levels of relationship satisfaction, conscientiousness, interpersonal support, and overall trust. The more mindful and intentional you are in your relationship, the greater chances of high relationship satisfaction, as well as higher associated traits, higher levels of associated traits, such as trust in the relationship, interpersonal support, and conscientiousness. Also, individuals who were either currently in a romantic relationship and singles can practice mindfulness in any of their relationships, romantic or platonic or otherwise, to increase relationship satisfaction overall. So what we found was that being intentional, being present, being mindful in your relationships, romantic or not, tended to increase relationship satisfaction overall. The limitations of our study, we had a few. First, we had a significantly smaller number of men versus women in our study. About 77% of our participants were women. So it would have been interesting to see maybe if more men had responded to our survey, how the data would have changed and whether levels of mindfulness would have changed as well. We also had a smaller number of participants overall. As I mentioned, we initially had 127 responses, but we could only use 85 due to some people not fully completing the survey, some people not really taking it seriously, and some people completed the survey in only like 4 or 5 minutes. So we didn't want to count those surveys into our study because those might not be representative. Finally, another limitation included the method of obtaining our participants. We largely use social media platforms, which may not be super effective because individuals can choose if they can see the survey, but most of them just chose not to take it. And it also did not give us a truly random sample, as our social media accounts are obviously tapered to our individual interests. So had we been able to gain a more truly random sample, we probably would have gotten better and more substantial data. So some future research and future applications that this study could contribute to. Future research can include measuring relationship satisfaction after having participants perform a mindfulness enhancing task. So as I mentioned, I believe it was Carandish who had a relationship enhancement program and found that mindfulness was positively correlated in that sense and tended to lead to better levels of communication. So future research could include the same kind of rhetoric, having participants engage in some sort of mindfulness relationship enhancing task to see if that has an effect on relationship satisfaction and mindfulness. Future research could also examine subjects' relationship history to see if higher levels of mindfulness are related to relationship length. So maybe if individuals who practice higher levels of mindfulness and tend to be more mindful overall had maybe longer relationships than individuals who are not mindful. We could also in the future survey couples and former couples rather than only individuals to see if the trends could be generalized to the relationship overall, including both partners and not just one individual. We could do kind of a similar study, but instead of focusing on individual participants, we could conduct the study as couples, which I think would give us some pretty interesting data as well. And finally, it may be worthwhile to consider how relationship satisfaction is affected or affects constructs among men and women respectively. These constructs could include, again, those various traits that we measured previously, and even look more into different measures as well. I'm sure that there were things our study missed, other traits that may have a positive correlation with mindfulness that we just didn't study. So it might be interesting to look at how different traits or constructs affect relationship satisfaction among men and women individually, as well as in a relationship. Here are our references. Here are more of our references. Thank you so much for watching. We had a really great time conducting this study. I feel like we've learned a lot about mindfulness and relationship satisfaction, and I feel as though it has a lot of real-world application as well, and I can use it in my own personal life. And thank you. Thanks for watching.